Hi, my name is Jonathan,
And I'm Deborah.
and we're here to tell you a little bit more about what we believe. So today we have the honor of having Dr. Ranahan with us. He's very well known as a faculty member on campus. And yeah, we're really honored to have you here. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr. Ranahan, William Ranahan, and I'm an ORU grad, so I graduated in 2005, and then I worked in industry for a little bit in Washington, Seattle, and then I went to an academic lab in Indianapolis, where I ended up doing grad school there. So my PhD is in biochemistry and molecular biology, particularly with epithelial polarity was the area that in breast cancer research. So I have come on as a faculty member here at ORU since 2013. I am the chair of the biology and chemistry department. I teach all kinds of classes, molecular cell biology, the intro class, medical genetics, all of that. I have 4 research labs, and we are looking at both cancer prevention and cancer treatment. We were just awarded ORU's first patent on the cancer treatment work that we've been doing.
Wow.
And so publications coming out there. So
That's amazing.
yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. We're so honored to have you here with us today. So today we have a question that's a little bit more complex and has a few different subtopics to it. So our followers were asking us how we can claim to be created in the image of a perfect God if we are still prone to genetic mutations and our body still has so many imperfections to it. And then just wondering if there's an explanation for all the seemingly useless parts of our bodies, like our appendix, our wisdom teeth, just all of that stuff. And don't all of these parts just prove natural selection and evolution over millions of years versus creation by a perfect being?
Yeah, those are great questions. You could write a whole book in response to those questions. Those are really good. So I think the best way to start would be to tell you a little bit about like how I landed where I am right now, and then you can kind of understand a little bit better my philosophy about this. So at ORU, as an undergrad, we were taught to use the scientific method. Mm-hmm. And so the scientific method is that you observe a phenomenon, and then you come up with some ideas, some hypotheses, and you test them to see if that makes sense. And what we were told is that the scientific method is really about disproving things. The strength of the scientific method is in its ability to disprove, so that you can with confidence say, okay, it's not that. But it turns out proving things is really difficult. So the scientific method is more about getting rid of false positives, so to speak, or things that you think are causative and they're not. Because it's easier to disprove something than it is to prove something. Okay. So really the strength of the scientific method is to disprove things and then reject them. And so if you can't disprove your hypothesis, then you're left with it. And over time, if lots of people can't disprove it, we go, okay, maybe that's true. Okay. And then if that happens, over large periods of time with lots of people, that we say, okay, maybe it's true all the time everywhere, and we call that a law. So it goes from a hypothesis to a theory to a law. Mm-hmm. We have very few laws. There's like thermodynamics or whatever. Yeah. Like those are laws. But theories, we have not very many of those because most of them get knocked out at the hypothesis level. So, so what I did was I took the data on, because we're talking about how did we get here? Mm-hmm. Like what? We see complexity, and we see things falling apart, and our world, if left to its own devices, just sort of devolves. And so we're supposed to figure out how did we get here, and we have different narratives that give us potential answers. So the first narrative I was taught as a scientist is that there's nothing outside the natural universe, that the physical material world is all there is, and everything in it can be explained by referencing this reality, our material physical world. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when it comes to life, it's difficult because if you look throughout the universe, there's no life. And the Earth is this anomaly in the middle of space. I mean, it's just this anomaly. There's all this life, and it's complex. And where did that come from? It's shocking, and it sort of demands an answer, right? And so, so we say, okay, well, I'm limited as a scientist to just natural explanations. So, what forces, what powers are at work on this planet all the time, everywhere, right? Because we're talking about history as well as future, and we're talking about everywhere on the planet all the time. And so I started thinking, okay, what forces are there everywhere at all times that could have anything to do with life? And the reality is, if we are going to exclude anything from outside of nature, what we're left with is entropy. We're left with the law of entropy. And that is that in our universe, everywhere at all time, things are breaking down. Energy is being converted into different forms and being lost to the universe, but energy is being lost. The whole universe is cooling and all of that, which makes it very difficult to imagine how, via purely natural processes, how did we go from the stuff floating around in space to what we see on our planet? How do we go from inorganic to organic life? And so you can test this. In fact, we used to think that organic sprung out of inorganic because the theory of evolution suggests that it does. And so we used to think that life came out of non-life. And there was this fun experiment where they put a jar out with some meat, and then some maggots appeared, and they go, "Ha! Look, life from non-life." And then somebody's like, "Yeah, but if you cover the jar, what happens? There's no life in there." So they said, "Oh, so spontaneous generation doesn't happen." People used to believe in spontaneous generation, right? I think we've actually gone back to believing in spontaneous generation, because if you look in your textbooks, they try to give you a how the world began story, and it's the same thing every time. It's inorganic, and then maybe lightning and time and organic, right? Which is the same thing, right? So as a scientist, I find that explanation wildly unconvincing. I can set up 1,000 experiments looking for entropy to be creative. It's just not. And it's not even creative on a simple scale. Like if I take a deck of cards and I just flip it up in the air, it's not going to land in a house of cards, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because the universe is going towards entropy, right? And when I look at my body's 37 trillion cells, each cell is more complex than like New York City. That's a stretch. Because I mean, that's not just a bunch of cards just leaning on each other. That is a dynamic, unbelievable complexity. So I have rejected entropy as a creative force. I don't believe entropy is creative. Okay. So that means I'm left looking for answers still for all of this. And I believe simply that something from outside the physical universe came in and started life. And so that the real divide is there. The real divide is not like if you believe that something came in from outside of the material universe and did this, how that happened. That's not the actual real. The real divide is between people who think entropy is creative and people who don't. That's the actual divide. A lot of faith groups agree that something came in from outside the physical universe and created life. They just don't agree on how. But my proposition is that is a lot closer philosophically than we are to people who believe entropy is creative, right? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to reject entropy as a explanation for this. Right. So we don't think it's all random. We don't think it came together through time and chance. We believe it was designed, which leads us to this question. Okay, fine. If it's designed by this perfect God, like why are there little bits and why do things break and why does it all suck down here? And those are great questions. But it does beg the question that so if we're going to open the door to God, like being we'll call this thing that comes in from outside God. Mm-hmm. If you're going to ask about that, particularly you're going to ask me, and I believe in the Judeo-Christian God, and so I'm going to answer from that perspective. Mm-hmm. So if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in the Judeo-Christian explanation, humans were created perfect.
Yeah.
And given free will. And then we blew it up. And so we believe as Christians that God created us to be with us in relationship with us. And so we value relationship pretty high. And we believe that God's kingdom is returning to earth, that God has not abandoned the earth, that he created the earth and he was with those people on the earth ruling. And that's his design. That's what he's going to do. And there's no plan B. We believe that God is coming back and he's bringing his kingdom to earth and he's going to redeem everything. So that's kind of important when we think about our current state, because according to the Bible, our current state is this fallen state where, unlike the way that our good creator created it, we have sullied it, so to speak, but it will be made well again. Okay. So the question.
Mm-hmm.
Which one would you like to answer first?
So let's talk about fragile leg bones to start off with, because we had a few people who were asking us, they're talking about the ACL and the Achilles tendon, and they were saying, well, as humans, most of our weight is bared on our legs. But our leg bones are just so fragile, or our tendons and our ligaments are just so fragile. And you would think that a perfect God who just understands and knows everything would create that a little bit more effectively. And then they were saying, doesn't that prove the idea of natural selection and evolution? Because people would move from being four-legged creatures to two-legged.
Okay.
And how that all plays into, if you're saying evolution is not correct, then why weren't we built more wisely with...
Great. Let's...
Just a clarifying question too. Are you necessarily ruling out evolution, or from what I understand, you're ruling out non-theistical evolution?
So I'm ruling out entropy as a creative force.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Just clarifying.
Yeah. So let's do both at the same time. My feeling with entropy not being creative is really just talking about how the party started. But once the party starts, the forces that are, in other words, the original act of creation is one thing.
Yeah.
How organisms change over time is another thing.
Yeah.
So
governed in the system that was created initially.
So think about it like this. Let's say you're in your truck and you're driving, because we're in Oklahoma, we all have trucks. So you're in your truck and you're driving and you get stuck in the mud and you're like, I'm stuck. And you get out and the wheels are just spinning and you're stuck. You get back in the car and you look down and there's a four-wheel drive button. And you hit the four-wheel drive button and you get out, you're unstuck. Okay. Is the presence of the four-wheel drive button suggestive of design or evolution? In other words, like, did this just happen via unguided processes, or is it there on purpose? Well, we would probably argue that it's there on purpose, because we found ourselves in a situation where that skill was needed or that technology was needed, and lo and behold, it's there. So the question then we have to ask ourselves is, what we find today biologically, and we can put organisms in different situations and they don't die immediately. And in fact, we find a remarkable amount of flexibility within each species. So you have to ask yourself, is adaptation, which is the ability to survive in hostile or changing environments, is adaptation suggestive? Because just like the four-wheel drive button, the ability to adapt is stupid complicated. Like, adaptation means that I have genes that can give me gene products that can change the cell's identity, which can then change the organ, which can change the organism, so that you survive in different environments. That clearly didn't happen. Like, for instance, you walk into a hot room, you begin to sweat. That means the surface area of the water radiates heat faster, and so you cool off faster, right? So that's a very simple explanation of a stimuli and response. And the ability to sweat to decrease your temperature didn't just pop into existence. Right. You revealed it because you were in that environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was already there, like the base was already
Exactly. So is that more like programming, which is intelligence, or is that just random? Like, does that strike you as random and as you know what I mean?
Yeah, makes sense.
When I see adaptation, I think design. When I see the four-wheel drive button, I think, well, somebody knew that I would be driving in mud.
Yeah.
And I hit the button.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're talking about parts of the body that you think are not optimal, we have to consider a couple things. Come at it from the perspective of a designer. Let's say that you are an engineer trying to design a human body. Mm-hmm. What do you need the human body to do? And think about where the human body is going to live, what the human body is going to eat, what it's going to need to survive. And then think about, you want this human body to be sustained in wildly different environments, in wildly different cultures and climates and nutritional demands, all of that.
Through centuries.
Yeah, over long periods of time. So I think this, in particular, this question, calling a particular muscle weak, it depends on what you're doing. And it depends on what you need that muscle for. But just the fact that humans cover every climate on this planet, humans go from being crazy athletes to quite sedentary, and they can do all of it, and they can get in everywhere. I mean, like, to me, that suggests that the functionality of these bones are pretty remarkable. Not to mention the biology. I'm not even getting into the biology because it is awesome. It is intricate. There are cells. Your bones are constantly being remade right now.
Wow.
They're being eaten and new bone is being laid down. Your bones are constantly reacting and responding to your environment. And the whole thing's dynamic, and it's phenomenal. So when the theory of evolution was first put out there, we had a list of hundreds of vestigial organs that humans had, right? Mm-hmm. So vestigial organs are evolutionary relics, things that we find no purpose for. And this is true across the board. We call it vestigial until we figure out what it's for. And then we're like, whoops, guess it's not vestigial. Guess we need it. So we've just steadily backed off on that. It's just embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. If you look at the stuff that we were putting out there, like the cell would be just a bag of goo. I mean, even Charles Darwin was like, hey, listen, he was a very honest man and educated. And he wrote in his book, The Origin of Species, if we find any complexity in biology, then my theory doesn't work, because my theory is based on it being simple, because he knew that entropy is not creative. So he was very honest, and I just wish we were as honest as Charles Darwin was, because he basically just said it. Hey, look, if the fossil record gets uncovered and we don't find these intermediate species, then dump it. If you look in a cell and it's complex, then dump this theory. It doesn't work, clearly, right? And we just didn't listen to him, which is sad, because it's brought us to the wrong place over and over again. If you think that we all came from a single common ancestor, then entropy is your mode, and most of what we have is junk. That must be true, right? Yeah. How could you possibly, through a random, unguided process, hone down, right? It's random. Yeah. There is no keeping good and dropping bad, because there is no good or bad, because it's random. Mm. You don't get to have it both ways. You got to pick. Mm. So, for instance, the human genome, 3.2 billion letters, and we discovered that only 1% of that codes for protein. So we said, there's your proof. Most of it's junk DNA. And in the textbooks, it was called junk DNA. We don't call it junk DNA anymore, because it was really simple. If it's junk DNA, you should be able to take it out. You don't need it. It's garbage, right? So you take it out. What do you get? Dead. That's what you get. Dead. Oh, so take out this.
Purpose.
Yes, obviously.
Right.
And if every bit of the DNA has a purpose, well, then how do you explain that? Remember, evolution works by functional unit A becomes more functional with this change, and that's how you keep it. And then it becomes more functional, right?
Yes.
Okay. I should be able to go backwards, right? Yes. And I should see the less evolved is still functional and still functional and still functional. Mm-hmm. But that's not how it works.
It's all or nothing.
Yeah. Even simple things like a single-celled organism, it needs a membrane. Where do you get membranes? All membranes come from pre-existing membranes. well, that's awkward. Where'd the first membrane come from?
Yeah.
So the 1% that codes for genes, the rest of it must be junk. Oh, wait, no, it's not junk. We need all of it. So that's the trend. That's what we find. Vestigial organs are disappearing only because we find their use. We find their purpose. Same thing with the appendix. Like my appendix tried to kill me.
Yeah.
It did. Yeah. And I was not happy with it, and I took it out. But so you could say, like, what the heck? I've got a thing in me that could kill me. Yeah. Well, okay, so can your heart if it stops beating. Yeah. It's keeping you alive. It's helping keep you alive. It's actually part of your immune system. And it has function. But we're not in a perfect world. I'll give you another example. Your cells can't replicate themselves forever. But they should be able to. Mm-hmm. So what happens when you replicate DNA is that the chromosome gets smaller and smaller every time you replicate it. The ends of the chromosomes are like caps that protect it. So if you can't repair the ends of the chromosomes, they're called telomeres, then the DNA gets shorter, and eventually you lose too much DNA, and then the cell dies, and then the organism dies. So it's called cellular aging, but the telomeres get shorter and shorter. Well, we have the machine that repairs the ends of the chromosomes. It's called telomerase. We have it. It works. It just stops working. So we have no idea why. When we discovered telomerase, they called it the immortal gene. They said, we've got immortality now. We know how we age, and we can stop it. So they turn it on when it's not supposed to be on, and you get cancer.
Wow.
So we have a gene that could make us immortal, but it stops working.
That's very interesting.
Almost as if we were designed to be immortal, and we're in this like broken down situation where we're not anymore.
Kind of lines up with...
Well, no, I mean, it's coincidental, totally coincidental. Yeah. Wow. So my response for these vestigial organs argument is that if you look at the design, if you look at it from a design point of view, it is remarkable that these organs exist at all. And their function is ridiculously wide. And bones, in particular, are constantly adapting, constantly remodeling. I don't think the vast majority of humans that live on the planet have a problem with those bones. Yeah. Yeah. Doing what they normally do. We are extreme. Like humans like to do crazy stuff. And that's, that's mostly why we get into trouble. Yeah.
And that's why it's more prone to injury.
I don't think it's a design problem. I think it's a flexibility problem. I think you need, because if I'm designing it for humans are tall and short. Yeah. Humans are skinny and overweight. Humans live in all kinds of places. So what I'm really looking for is something that could do all things at all times. Yeah. I need flexibility. Yeah. I need adaptability. Yeah. I do believe organisms adapt. Yeah. I do believe that because we see that all the time everywhere. What we don't see is cows becoming chickens or birds becoming reptiles. Right. Like we don't see that. We don't see it in the fossil record, and we don't see it in real time. So
yeah. So for that stuff with that's more I understand that the need for flexibility, and maybe that's why things are designed in a certain way. But even just going back to talking about like the appendix, for example. Yeah. So you're suggesting that there might be a purpose to the appendix that we don't know yet.
Absolutely.
But we can live perfectly fine without it inside our bodies.
So think about adaptation. It gives you the ability to do things in certain circumstances and situations that you couldn't otherwise. Right. So your ability to produce melanin after exposure to the sun is an adaptation to protect you. But that ability, like when that UV hits you, you're causing massive DNA damage. So you could say, well, why does the sun cause UV damage if God created it and it's good? Like you could, you have to understand that we're not in a perfect world. Yeah. And so all kinds of, everything is breaking down. So what we have is a really well-designed human that's in a entropic universe. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing. Yeah. So the entropic universe is our fault, not God's.
Yeah. It's interesting the entropic universe, it's very clear that it still exists, but it couldn't be all that exists. That's really your argument today. Like I think that's a really interesting argument.
And if you see things falling apart, doesn't that mean they were all together at some point? Like if the cake is falling apart, doesn't that mean at one point it was like hot out of the oven, ready to go, delicious?
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I think what we see here is the clock is ticking and everything's winding down, which suggests that at some point there wasn't entropy and that we were all put together and that it was perfect and we didn't have pain and suffering and all these horrible things. But I think the Christian faith offers something else that's remarkable as well, and that is a God who entered into entropy and experienced the brokenness with us.
Yeah.
Now that blows my mind. I don't know of any other God that would do that. That sounds crazy to me. If you were all sufficient, all powerful, needed nothing, what on earth would you? Now I'm a dad, and we're told in the Christian Bible to refer to God as Father. So I'm using that analogy.
Yeah.
If my kids are suffering, the very least I would do is to be with them in their suffering. And that to me, that's like a human, like I would. And you know, the Bible says that you, though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your kids. How much more does God?
Yeah.
So it's insane, but it's consistent.
Yeah.
So God puts on flesh, becomes a human, and suffers with you so that you don't have to suffer alone. He doesn't take the suffering away, which is interesting. But he doesn't let you suffer alone either. So that speaks pretty clear about the character of God. Like he's not afraid of pain or suffering, and it will not have the final say, because in that scripture, God's kingdom comes to earth and makes it right again.
Yeah.
So that's our hope, is that's where we're going.
Yeah. It's interesting because even as we're talking right now about that, like while we're talking about these, in quotations, imperfect organs and stuff, Jesus had the same ones.
Yeah.
Jesus had the appendix as well.
Yes.
We were going to touch on wisdom teeth, fragile bone structure. Jesus had all of it. He chose to enter and have the same human body that we do.
Yes.
And I mean, it's amazing
And
when I think about it.
I don't know why we have wisdom teeth. I don't know why the appendix fails.
Yeah.
That, I mean, like the appendix failing could be a modern chemical thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be something in our environment.
Yeah.
I mean,
Might
we
have
have
been different in the past.
Yeah, we certainly know that our diets aren't great.
Yeah.
Especially in Western diets are just terrible. And that can cause all kinds of problems, including osteoporosis and, you know, other bone issues. But I don't know of any other belief set where we're not denying the pain, we're sharing it. And that's a really different way to do it. And what's crazy to me is that the human nature, for instance, if you go and put in prison, that's bad, right? But if you get put in solitary confinement, like that's real bad. People lose their minds there, right? So there's something about even sharing pain that makes it more bearable.
Yeah.
And it reduces the weight of that pain on you. And it's just interesting that God put on flesh and suffered with us and is not afraid to do that.
That's crazy.
You know? So these organs, these imperfections, I think are part of the imperfection that has come on creation. I don't think imperfections were designed in place, and I don't think that they're going to be there forever. The Christian Bible says that when Jesus came back from the dead, he had a new body, and that we are going to get new bodies. And that new body was able to do everything the old body did, plus other things. And so, I mean, that's kind of our hope. That's what we believe.
It won't always be like this.
Yes.
I think kind of a different subtopic, just because we had talked a little bit about pain. Just maybe the last thing we want to touch on a little bit is we know that pain is there for a reason. Like we want to feel pain to know when something needs to be addressed or something needs to be looked at. But what some people were asking us is, why do you feel pain from like a tiny hole in your tooth, for example? Yeah. But then, I mean, you do cancer research, and we know that for a lot of different cancers or a lot of different stages, you don't necessarily feel a pain when you have a tumor until it's almost too late. So why do you think we're not warned for some of this, like the more serious stuff, and then we have just huge warnings for like the tiniest things? Like, how does that all fit into kind of what you're explaining?
yeah, so if we're going to assume design behind that, there are practical and then there are spiritual reasons, I believe.
Yeah.
Practically, a hole in your tooth means an infection very, very close to the blood-brain barrier. And so if you get a bacterial infection in here, that can become sepsis and life-threatening really fast. So I would argue that an unaddressed oral infection would kill you faster than most cancers.
Well, yeah.
So there's a good reason to get that taken care of quickly, right?
Right.
Now, cancers are a ton of different diseases, and they change over time, and so that there's some of them definitely hurt. But I understand what you're saying, that it's typically a disease of age, happening more later on in age, and typically not necessarily immediately painful. And that's because what's happening is cancer is you going off. So cancer originates from your cells that are taking the designs that were used to keep you healthy and warping them, twisting them out of their intended usages. Everything the cancer cells does, it's using programmed pathways to do it. It's just doing them wrong. And it's a great example of what happens when you go just a little bit off from the design. The organism, the cancer, thinks it's starting life over again and tries to reproduce the whole thing and gets real bad. So the immediate answer for the cancer bit is that it starts off incredibly slow, and it's incredibly, in most cancers, you have a localized cell that's growing, and your immune system doesn't recognize it because it was you. But I would say just in general, most cancers, less pain because it's not an immediate threat to your health.
Okay.
I think the pain matches the acuteness of the situation. So
it just is kind of unfortunate that by the time you really do feel the pain, it already is too late.
It just all depends.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody misses it. Some people find it right away. Some people find it accidentally. But some people would definitely argue that it's incredibly painful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's a mercy if it's not,
Yeah.
It's just a shame that it has that time to build and grow over time before it gets to the point where you realize that you're in pain.
And you think that could be part of the imperfect word that you're talking about?
Well, you have to understand that all brokenness, all of it is a warping or twisting of what was good.
Yeah.
Cancer wouldn't exist. I know this sounds dumb, but cancer wouldn't exist if humans didn't. Humans have the ability to reproduce, which makes possible cancer. So if I'm going to keep growing and I'm going to have cells that can differentiate, in other words, sperm and egg come together as one cell, and then they differentiate into you, like 37 trillion skin, eye, bone, muscle, like these cells differentiated, they became different from what they started as. That ability means cancer is possible, because if that program gets reinstituted, for instance, wound healing is a great example. I get a cut. These cells that are not supposed to be growing, I do not want them to grow, suddenly need to grow, right? Because I can't heal without their growth. So what we do is we take the inflammatory signal, we send it out to tell the immune system, stimulate growth, and help me fill this in and kill any bacteria and all that. The cancer cell does the same thing, creates a fake inflammation signal and then promotes growth. And it's doing this in every area that is supposed to be healthy and normal, and it's just hijacking those processes. So it's like kind of this entire topic is like, why are there shadows? Well, there's shadows because objects and light exist.
Right.
And so what you're seeing is like the not great version of it. But it's made possible because we exist.
Right. And because we are complex.
Yeah. You have complex diseases. I would just say on the other end of that, look, I mean, I could tell you 100 stories of people that have been miraculously healed from cancer or found it looking for something else completely. Or I think that there's a lot of mercy and grace in this field in particular.
That's awesome.
It's amazing.
The fact that you live as long as you do and
Yeah.
don't get cancer is crazy to me.
Yeah.
Because you're exposed to chemicals and radiation all the time. I mean, all the time. We shouldn't. I took a developmental genetics class, and I don't understand how anyone's born ever. Like the number of things that have to go right for somebody to be born normal is crazy. It's crazy. So
That's so cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all of that with us.
yeah.
Yeah. So
I
really
mean-
good insights.
We'd love, I know you probably have a lot more that you could even say, and we'd love to hear more about like your cancer research and stuff.
Yeah.
At some other point, I don't know if it'd be made possible. Hopefully.
Absolutely. And if people have questions,
Yeah.
shoot fire.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think we answered these well?
I think you
Yes, I
answered
think
them
it was
very well.
really- yeah.
Yeah. And I think that surely there are things like, even as you were explaining, there are things that we could go deeper on
Yeah.
or ask more questions about. So really
Yeah.
we encourage also our viewers, if you have more questions, continue to ask them, because we encourage, and I think you responded to our
Yeah.
email with this as well. We encourage you to challenge what you believe.
Absolutely.
Because that is really what gets you to answers. Don't be
Yes.
afraid of challenging what you believe, because we believe that we serve a God who's not afraid of that challenge,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll take all comers. And here's the thing, we're on the same team. Like we want the truth. If you want the truth, then let's do this.
Yeah.
And we can have an ongoing conversation. It doesn't have to be I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. It's about us coming together, using our minds
Yeah.
to get at the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you want the truth, then we're on the same team.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ranahan.
I really appreciate it.
We really appreciate it.
Yes.
And we encourage our viewers to come and check out our next episode, where we'll have another question to answer for you guys.
Yes. Thank you. Hey guys, thanks for taking the time to engage with us. All of our contents can be found on the following platforms.
If you enjoy our content, remember to like and comment. Also, if you have a question of your own, you can send it to us through Instagram DMs. We'll try to answer all of the questions to the best of our abilities. All questions will be kept anonymous.
If you found this video helpful, please be sure to share it on your story or to share it with your friends. They might find it helpful too.
See you guys soon!